The snow came down so thick that Hannah Calloway could barely see her own outstretched hand. But she knew her mare Juniper was out there somewhere in the whiteout, and she was not about to let that horse freeze to death alone. She had made it maybe 50 yards from the small cabin she rented on the outskirts of Concord, California, when a hand like iron clamped around her wrist and pulled her backward with such force she nearly lost her footing. "Are you trying to die?" The voice was deep, rough as gravel, and when Hannah blinked the snow from her lashes, she found herself staring up at the biggest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the swirling white behind him. Dark hair hung past his collar, plastered to his face by the wet snow, and his jaw was covered in several days' worth of stubble. His eyes were an intense gray blue, like storm clouds, and they blazed with an anger that made her take an involuntary step back. "Let go of me." Hannah jerked her arm, but his grip did not budge. "My horse is out there. She broke through the fence when the storm hit. I have to find her. You will not make it 10 more feet in this." His voice was absolute, brooking no argument. "This is a mountain blizzard. You city folk do not understand what that means." "I am not city folk," Hannah shot back, though in truth she had only been in California for 8 months, having come west from Pennsylvania after her father died. "And Juniper is all I have. I cannot just leave her." Something shifted in the man's expression. The anger did not disappear, but it was joined by something else. Understanding, perhaps, or maybe just resignation. He released her wrist and turned his face into the wind, studying the wall of white with narrowed eyes. "Where did you last see the horse?" "Near the creek bed, heading toward the foothills." Hannah had to shout to be heard over the howling wind. "Please, I know it is dangerous, but she is terrified. She will run herself to death." The man was quiet for a long moment, and Hannah thought he might just walk away, leave her to her foolishness. Instead, he reached up and pulled his thick wool coat tighter around himself. "Get inside. Bar the door. I will find your horse. You cannot go out in this alone. You just said it was too dangerous. I have been through worse. I know these mountains." He was already moving past her, his long legs carrying him toward the swirling white with a confidence that spoke of years spent in wilderness. "What does the mare look like?" "Chestnut, white blaze down her face, 3 white socks. Her name is Juniper. She knows her name." Hannah's voice cracked. "Please, be careful." He glanced back at her, and for just a moment, the hard edges of his face softened. "I will bring her back. Now get inside before you freeze." Then he was gone, swallowed by the blizzard as completely as if he had never existed. Hannah stood there in the driving snow, her heart pounding, watching the place where he had disappeared. She did not even know his name. She had seen him around Concord a few times, usually coming into town for supplies, always alone. People called him the Mountain Man, said he lived up in the high country, trapping and hunting. She had never spoken to him before today, had only noticed him because he was impossible not to notice. With his size and that wild, untamed look about him, the cold finally drove her back to the cabin. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely lift the heavy wooden bar into place across the door. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, and she fed it more wood, building it back up until orange flames licked hungrily at the logs. Then she paced, back and forth across the small room, unable to sit, unable to do anything but worry. An hour passed, then 2. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse, the wind screaming around the cabin like something alive and furious. Hannah put coffee on to boil, more for something to do than because she wanted it. She kept going to the single window, pressing her face against the cold glass. But she could see nothing beyond the frosted panes but white. What if he did not come back? What if he died out there, trying to save her horse? She did not even know him. But the thought made her sick with guilt and fear. She should have listened to him. She should have stayed inside in the first place. Juniper was just a horse. She was not worth a man's life. But even as she thought it, she knew she could not have lived with herself if she had not tried. Juniper had been her father's horse before she was Hannah's. The mare was the last living thing that connected her to her old life, to the family she had lost. Her mother had died when Hannah was 12, and her father had followed 6 years later, his heart simply giving out one morning while he was shoeing a horse in his blacksmith shop. At 18, Hannah had found herself alone in the world with nothing but a small inheritance and a chestnut mare. Coming west had seemed like a new beginning, a chance to start over. Concord was a small town nestled in the shadow of Mount Diablo, with the San Francisco Bay not far to the west. The year was 1878, and California was still wild enough that a woman alone drew curious looks and whispered conversations. Hannah had found work as a seamstress, renting a tiny cabin on the edge of town from a widow named Mrs. Patterson. It was not much, but it was hers, and she had been slowly building a life. Until tonight, when everything had gone wrong. It was past midnight when she finally heard something outside. Heavy footsteps crunching through snow, and then a low, familiar whinny that made Hannah's heart leap into her throat. She rushed to the door, throwing the bar aside and yanking it open. The mountain man stood there in the howling storm, one massive hand gripping Juniper's halter. The mare was trembling, her coat white with snow, but she was alive. She was safe, but the man was not. Even in the dim light spilling from the cabin, Hannah could see that something was terribly wrong. His face was gray beneath the stubble, his lips tinged blue. His right hand, the one not holding Juniper, hung limply at his side, and when Hannah looked down, she saw his fingers were white as bone. "Oh God," she breathed. Get inside right now." He did not argue, which told her more about his condition than anything else could have. He released Juniper's halter and stumbled through the doorway, nearly falling. Hannah caught him as best she could, though he probably weighed twice what she did, all of it muscle and bone and solid strength. She managed to guide him to the chair nearest the fire, and he collapsed into it with a groan that sounded like it was ripped from somewhere deep inside him. "Your hands," Hannah said, kneeling in front of him. "Let me see your hands." He lifted them slowly, and her stomach twisted. Both hands were deathly pale, the fingers rigid. His right hand was worse, the fingertips completely white. No color at all. Frostbite. Severe frostbite. "I need to get you warmed up." Slowly. Hannah had seen frostbite before, back in Pennsylvania. One of her father's friends had lost 3 toes to it after falling through ice on the Susquehanna River. She knew that warming too quickly could be as dangerous as the freezing itself. "This is going to hurt. I am not going to lie to you. Already hurts." His voice was tight, strained. Now that he was closer to the fire, she could see him more clearly. His face was strong, all hard angles and planes, with a straight nose that looked like it might have been broken once. There was a scar through his left eyebrow, cutting a pale line through the dark hair. His eyes were fixed on the flames, and she saw him clench his jaw against a wave of pain. "What is your name?" Hannah asked as she grabbed a basin and poured lukewarm water from the kettle. Not hot. Lukewarm. She had to remember that. Kellen Erickson. "I am Hannah Calloway, and I am so sorry." This is my fault. I should never have gone out there. Your horse would be dead." Kellen looked at her then, and despite the pain he was clearly in, his voice was steady. "Sometimes things are worth the risk." Hannah gently took his right hand and lowered it into the basin. The moment the water touched his skin, Kellen made a sound between his teeth, a hiss of agony. His whole body went rigid, every muscle tensing like iron. "I know," Hannah said softly. "I know it hurts, but we have to get blood flowing back into your fingers." She had never seen a man try so hard not to show pain. Sweat broke out on Kellen's forehead despite the cold still clinging to him. His left hand gripped the arm of the chair so tightly she heard the wood creak. But he did not pull away from her, did not try to stop her as she carefully worked warmth back into his frozen flesh. After several minutes, she switched to his left hand, which was not quite as bad, but still dangerously pale. Kellen's breathing had gone harsh and ragged, but he kept his eyes fixed on some point beyond her shoulder, his jaw locked tight. "Tell me about finding Juniper," Hannah said, desperate to distract him. "Where was she?" "Near the creek, like you said." Kellen's voice came out rough, but he latched onto the conversation like a lifeline. "She was trying to get under the trees. Smart horse. I had to walk her back. Could not risk riding in that storm. Too easy to get turned around, walk off a cliff." "How long were you out there?" 3 hours? Maybe 4. 4 hours. 4 hours in a mountain blizzard." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. This was not the time for crying. "You saved her life. Thank you does not seem like enough." "No thanks needed." Kellen's face was still gray, but some color was starting to return to his fingers. The tips were going from white to a mottled red-purple that Hannah knew meant the frostbite was deep. "You would have done the same if you could." "I would have died. Probably." The blunt honesty made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. She carefully lifted his hands from the water, wrapping them in clean cloths. His fingers were swelling now, the skin starting to blister in places. "You need a doctor," Hannah said. "Cannot get to town in this storm. It will blow itself out by morning." Kellen looked down at his hands, and something dark passed across his face. "Will I lose them?" "I do not know." Hannah would not lie to him. Some of the fingers look bad. The tips might be too far gone. But maybe not. Maybe if we keep them clean, keep infection away, they will heal. Kellen nodded slowly. He was shivering now, deep tremors that shook his whole frame. Hannah realized that his coat was soaked through, his clothes wet and cold against his skin. "You need to get out of those wet things before you develop pneumonia on top of everything else." She stood, moving to the small trunk where she kept her linens. "I have blankets. You can wrap yourself in those while your clothes dry by the fire." "Miss Calloway, I do not think—" "I will turn around," Hannah said firmly. "But you are half frozen, and sitting in wet wool is going to make you sick. Please, you walked into a blizzard for my horse. Let me help you." For a moment, she thought he would argue, but then he nodded. Hannah turned her back, staring hard at the wall while she listened to the sounds of him struggling out of his wet coat and shirt. It took a long time, and she heard his breath catch more than once when he had to use his damaged hands. She wanted to help, but she knew he would not accept it, would not want that kind of assistance from a woman he barely knew. "All right," Kellen said finally, his voice rough. Hannah turned to find him wrapped in her 2 heaviest blankets, his broad shoulders barely contained by the wool. His chest was bare above the blankets, and she caught a glimpse of hard muscle and a few scars before she quickly looked away, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. She busied herself hanging his wet clothes near the fire, trying not to think about the fact that there was a half-naked man sitting in her cabin. "You should sleep," she said. "You can take the bed. I will sit up and keep the fire going." "I am not taking your bed. You just walked for hours through a blizzard. You have severe frostbite. You are taking the bed." Hannah crossed her arms, trying to look stern. "I am not going to argue about this." Kellen opened his mouth as if to do exactly that. But then another shiver racked him, and he closed it again. "Fine, but only for a few hours. Then you take it." It was the best she was going to get. So Hannah nodded. She helped him to the narrow bed in the corner, trying not to notice how his weight made the ropes creak, how much space he took up. He lay down with a groan, and she piled more blankets on top of him, tucking them around his shoulders. "Thank you," she said softly. "For Juniper. For risking your life." Kellen looked up at her, and in the firelight, his eyes were the color of smoke. "Get some rest, Hannah Calloway. Morning will come soon enough." She wanted to say something else, but the words caught in her throat, so she just nodded and turned away. She spent the next few hours tending the fire, occasionally checking on Juniper, who she had managed to get into the small lean-to stable attached to the cabin. The mare was still shaken, but otherwise unharmed, which was more than Hannah had dared hope for. Kellen slept fitfully, sometimes muttering in his sleep, sometimes jerking awake with a gasp before settling again. Each time, Hannah checked on him, feeling his forehead for fever, making sure he was still breathing steadily. His hands lay outside the blankets, wrapped in their cloths, and even in sleep, his face was tight with pain. Dawn came late and gray, the storm finally beginning to ease. By the time full light filtered through the window, the snow had stopped, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh powder. Hannah made coffee and heated up leftover cornbread, and the smell of it seemed to rouse Kellen. He sat up slowly, wincing as the movement jarred his hands. "How do they feel?" Hannah asked, bringing him a cup of coffee. She had to help him hold it, his bandaged hands too clumsy to manage. "Like they are on fire," Kellen admitted, "which I suppose is better than not feeling them at all. We need to change the bandages, and I want to get you to the doctor as soon as the road is passable." Kellen nodded, sipping the coffee carefully. Hannah unwrapped his hands, her stomach clenching at what she saw. The blisters had gotten worse overnight, and the tips of 3 fingers on his right hand and 2 on his left were black. Not purple, not red. Black. "That is not good," Kellen said, his voice flat. "No," Hannah agreed quietly. "I'm sorry." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Kellen set down the coffee cup and looked at her. "I should get back to my cabin. I have supplies there, and I do not want to impose on you any longer. You cannot possibly think I am going to let you go back up the mountain with your hands like that." Hannah stared at him in disbelief. "What if you need help? What if infection sets in? You are staying here until you can see a doctor." "Miss Calloway." "Hannah, if you are going to argue with me, at least use my first name." Something that might have been a smile flickered across Kellen's face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Hannah, then, I have been taking care of myself in these mountains for 10 years. I do not need pride is going to get you killed." Hannah's voice came out sharper than she intended. "You nearly died last night. For my horse. The least you can do is let me make sure you recover." Kellen studied her for a long moment, and Hannah found herself unable to look away from those storm-gray eyes. Finally, he nodded. "All right. A few days. until we know if the fingers are going to heal or if they need to come off. The casual way he said it made Hannah's stomach turn. Come off. As if he were talking about trimming a nail, not losing parts of himself. But she supposed a man who lived alone in the mountains had to be practical about such things. Thank you, she said. Now, let me make you some breakfast. You need to keep your strength up. Over the next few days, Hannah learned more about Kellen Erickson than she had learned about anyone in her 8 months in Concord. He was not a talkative man by nature, but trapped in her small cabin with little to do but heal, he gradually opened up. He had come west from Minnesota after his parents died of scarlet fever when he was 19. He had worked as a logger for a few years, then as a guide leading wagon trains through the Sierra Nevada. 5 years ago, he had decided he was tired of people and had built himself a cabin high in the mountains, living off the land. Do you not get lonely? Hannah asked one evening as they sat by the fire. She mending a torn shirt, he watching the flames with those distant eyes. Sometimes, Kellen admitted. But I got tired of watching people destroy each other. Up in the mountains, things are simpler, cleaner. You hunt, you trap, you survive. No politics, no greed, no lies. No love either, Hannah said softly. No companionship. Kellen looked at her. Something flickered in his expression. No, he agreed. No love. The weight of those words hung in the air between them, and Hannah felt her cheeks warm. She bent back over her mending, suddenly very focused on her stitches. On the 4th day, she took Kellen into town to see the doctor. The road had been cleared enough for them to make the journey, though it took twice as long as usual. Kellen's hands had not improved. If anything, the blackening had spread slightly, and the pains seemed to be getting worse rather than better. Dr. Morrison was a thin, gray-haired man who had been practicing medicine in Concord for 15 years. He examined Kellen's hands with gentle efficiency, then looked up with somber eyes. The tips of these fingers are dead, he said bluntly. If we do not remove them, gangrene will set in and spread up your hands, into your arms. You will die, and it will not be pleasant. How much? Kellen's voice was steady, but Hannah saw the muscle jump in his jaw. 3 fingers on the right hand, down to the first knuckle. 2 on the left, same depth. I will do my best to save as much as I can, but I cannot make promises. Kellen was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Then he nodded. When? Now, if you are willing. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes. Hannah felt like she could not breathe. She reached out without thinking and touched Kellen's arm. I will stay with you, if you want. He looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of the pain or the loss, but something deeper. Loneliness, maybe. The terror of facing this alone. I would like that, he said quietly. Dr. Morrison gave Kellen laudanum for the pain, enough to make him drowsy, but not unconscious. Hannah held his left arm, the less damaged one, while the doctor worked on the right. She had seen blood before, had helped her father stitch up wounds on animals. But this was different. This was Kellen, and every cut of the doctor's knife felt like it was slicing into her own flesh. Kellen did not scream. He did not even cry out. But his whole body went rigid, every muscle locked tight, and the hand that she was holding squeezed hers so hard she felt bones grind together. She did not let go, did not pull away, just held on and whispered things she barely remembered afterward. That he was strong, that he would be all right, that she was there. When it was over, Kellen's right hand was missing the tips of his thumb, index finger, and middle finger. His left hand had lost the tips of his index and middle fingers. Dr. Morrison bandaged both hands carefully, then gave Hannah a bottle of laudanum and strict instructions on keeping the wounds clean. "He needs to rest," the doctor said. "No using those hands for at least 2 weeks, longer if possible. If you see red streaks, or if he develops a fever, bring him back immediately." Hannah paid the doctor with most of her savings and helped Kellen back to the wagon. He was pale and shaking, the laudanum and shock catching up with him. She drove back to her cabin slowly, trying to avoid the worst of the ruts, and helped him inside and into bed. For the next week, Kellen was in and out of consciousness, fighting pain and fever. Hannah barely slept, constantly tending to him, changing his bandages, forcing water and broth down his throat when he was lucid enough to swallow. She bathed his forehead with cool cloths when the fever spiked, and covered him with blankets when he shook with chills. On the 8th day, the fever finally broke. Hannah woke from a light doze in the chair by the bed to find Kellen looking at her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "You are awake," she said, relief flooding through her. "How do you feel?" "Like I was trampled by a herd of buffalo." His voice was hoarse from disuse, but alive, thanks to you. "Thanks to Dr. Morrison." "Thanks to you," Kellen repeated firmly. "He did the cutting, but you have been keeping me alive since." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "You saved Juniper. I owed you." "You do not owe me anything." Kellen tried to sit up and winced. Hannah quickly moved to help him, propping pillows behind his back. "I chose to go after your horse. You did not force me." "Why did you?" The question had been burning in Hannah for days. "You did not know me. You could have just walked away." Kellen was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on his bandaged hands. "When I came into town for supplies last month, I saw you with your horse. The way you talked to her, cared for her, it reminded me of my mother with her mare, back in Minnesota. My father always said you could tell a lot about a person by how they treated animals." He looked up at her. "I knew you were not going to give up looking for that horse, even if it killed you. So I figured one of us might as well survive the night." "You are a good man." Kellen Erickson. "I am a fool who lost half his fingers. You are a good man who saved a creature that mattered to someone." Hannah reached out and gently touched the bandages on his right hand. "These will heal. You will adapt. But you would never have been able to live with yourself if you had let me go out there alone." Kellen's eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Something warm and fragile and terrifying. Hannah pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of how close she was sitting, of the fact that they were alone in this cabin together. The people would talk if they knew. "I should make you something to eat," she said, standing quickly. "You must be starving." Over the next few weeks, Kellen healed. The wounds on his hands slowly closed, leaving raw pink scars where his fingertips used to be. He had to relearn how to do simple tasks, how to hold a cup, how to button a shirt. Hannah helped him when he would let her, but mostly she watched as he stubbornly figured things out on his own, his face set in lines of determination. They fell into a routine. Hannah would wake early and make breakfast, then go into town for her seamstress work. She would return in the afternoon to find Kellen had done what he could around the cabin, though his hands limited him. They would have dinner together and then spend the evenings by the fire, talking or sitting in comfortable silence. Hannah told him about her life in Pennsylvania, about her father's blacksmith shop and the way the Susquehanna River looked in autumn. Kellen told her about Minnesota winters and guiding wagon trains through the mountains, about the cabin he had built with his own hands in a valley so remote that sometimes he would go months without seeing another human being. "Do you miss it?" Hannah asked one night. "Your cabin? The solitude?" Kellen was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Not as much as I thought I would," he admitted. "Turns out there are things worth coming down from the mountain for." He did not look at her when he said it, but Hannah felt her heart skip nonetheless. By mid-March, Kellen's hands had healed enough that Dr. Morrison declared him fit to leave. The news should have made Hannah happy, but instead, she felt a strange aching sadness settle in her chest. Kellen had been living in her cabin for nearly 6 weeks. She had gotten used to his presence, to the sound of his voice, to the way he filled up the small space with his sighs and quiet strength. "I suppose you will want to get back to your cabin," Hannah said that evening, trying to keep her voice light. Kellen looked up from the piece of wood he had been whittling, teaching his damaged hands to work again. "I suppose I should." Neither of them moved. The fire crackled in the hearth, and somewhere outside, an owl called into the night. "Hannah," Kellen said finally, setting down the wood. "I need to tell you something." Her heart started to pound. "All right. These past weeks, being here with you, it has been the best time I've had in years, maybe ever." He stood, crossing to where she sat by the fire. "I came down from the mountains because I thought I was tired of people. But I was not tired of people. I was just waiting for the right person." "Kellen, let me finish." He knelt in front of her, his storm-gray eyes intense. "I know I am not much. I am a mountain man with half his fingers missing, no real home to speak of. But I have some money saved, and I can work. I can provide. And if you would have me, if you would consider it, I would like to court you properly. I would like to see if maybe this thing between us could become something more." Hannah felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "You want to court me?" "I want to marry you eventually, if I am being honest. But I figured I should probably court you first, do things right." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Unless you want to skip straight to the marrying part, I would be amenable to that too." Hannah laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears. "You infuriating man. You nearly died for my horse. You have been living in my cabin for 6 weeks, and now you want to court me? Is that a yes?" "That is a yes. You should have kissed me already instead of asking permission." Hannah reached out and grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. "I have been half in love with you since you came back through that blizzard with Juniper." Kellen's eyes widened, and then his mouth was on hers, warm and sure and perfect. His bandaged hands came up to cup her face, gentle despite their roughness, and Hannah melted into him, into this kiss she had been dreaming about for weeks, without admitting it even to herself. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, Kellen rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you," he said softly. "You already do," Hannah whispered back. "You already do." They were married 4 weeks later, in early April, by the preacher in Concord's small church. Hannah wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue like the spring sky. And Kellen wore new clothes, bought specially for the occasion, though he still looked uncomfortable in anything that was not buckskin and wool. Mrs. Patterson stood as Hannah's witness, and the town's blacksmith, a man named Tom who sometimes bought furs from Kellen, stood as his. The ceremony was simple, just a few words spoken in front of God and witnesses. But when Kellen slipped the gold band onto Hannah's finger, his damaged hands steady and sure, she felt like something fundamental in the universe had clicked into place. They spent their first night as husband and wife in the cabin that had become theirs. And when Kellen carried Hannah over the threshold, she laughed at the old-fashioned romance of it. But then he set her down and looked at her with such tenderness that the laughter died in her throat, replaced by something deeper, something that made her whole body warm. "I love you," Kellen said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I have not said it enough, but I do. More than I knew it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Hannah whispered. "My brave, stubborn, wonderful husband." He kissed her then, and the world narrowed down to just the two of them. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, who had built something real out of a blizzard and frostbite and the simple act of saving a horse. In the weeks and months that followed, they built a life together. Kellen took work guiding hunting parties into the mountains, something he could do despite his missing fingertips. Hannah continued her seamstress work, and between them, they made enough to live comfortably. They talked about maybe buying a piece of land, building a real house instead of living in the tiny rented cabin. But those were dreams for later. For now, they were content with what they had. In June, Kellen took Hannah up to see his mountain cabin. It was a 2-day ride into the high country, following trails so faint Hannah could barely see them. But Kellen knew every rock, every tree, and he led them unerringly to a small valley tucked between two peaks, where a log cabin sat nestled against the mountainside. "This is beautiful," Hannah breathed, looking around at the wildflowers carpeting the valley, the crystal-clear stream running through it. "No wonder you loved it up here." "I did love it," Kellen agreed. "But I love you more, and I need to be where you are." They spent 3 days at the cabin, and Hannah could see why Kellen had chosen this place. There was a peace here, a stillness that settled into your bones, made you forget about the rest of the world. But she also understood why he had chosen to leave it, because as beautiful as it was lonely. And loneliness could eat away at you from the inside, even if you did not realize it was happening. On their last day, they were packing up to leave when Kellen suddenly went still, his eyes fixed on something beyond Hannah's shoulder. She turned and found herself face to face with a massive brown bear, standing maybe 30 yards away at the edge of the tree line. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. She had seen bears from a distance before, but never this close. The creature was enormous, easily 7 feet tall, with small black eyes that studied them with an intelligence that was almost human. "Do not run," Kellen said softly, moving slowly to position himself between Hannah and the bear. Back toward the cabin, slowly. Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to tell him not to put himself in danger, but she knew better than to distract him right now. She took a careful step backward, then another, her eyes never leaving the bear. The bear huffed, a sound that seemed to shake the air, and took a step forward. Kellen raised his arms, making himself look as large as possible. "Get out of here," he roared, his voice booming across the valley. "Go on, get!" For a heart-stopping moment, the bear just stared at them. Then, almost lazily, it turned and ambled back into the forest, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Hannah's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the ground, her whole body shaking. Kellen was at her side in an instant, his arms around her, holding her tight. "It is all right," he murmured into her hair. "You are all right. It was just curious, not aggressive. But we are going to make a lot of noise on the way back down the mountain, just to be safe." "You put yourself between me and a bear," Hannah said, her voice muffled against his chest. "Of course I did. You are my wife. I would put myself between you and anything." The simple certainty in his voice made Hannah hold him tighter. This man, her husband, had proven time and again that he would sacrifice anything for her, and she would do the same for him. They made it back to Concord without further incident, and life settled back into its comfortable rhythm. Summer turned to autumn, and the mountains blazed with gold and red. Hannah discovered she was pregnant in early October, and when she told Kellen, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with a joy she had never heard from him before. "A baby," he kept saying, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you ready to be a father?" Hannah asked, suddenly nervous. "I have been ready for this my whole life and did not even know it," Kellen said, and kissed her until she forgot how to worry. The pregnancy was not easy. Hannah was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Kellen hovered over her like a mother hen, bringing her ginger tea and plain bread, anything that might help settle her stomach. He took over all the heavy work around the cabin and even tried his hand at sewing, though his missing fingertips made it difficult. "I am starting to understand why people pay you for this," he said one evening, squinting at the shirt he was trying to mend. "This is harder than skinning a bear." Hannah laughed from her place on the bed, where she was resting under doctor's orders. "You are doing wonderfully for someone who has never held a needle before." "I am doing terribly, and we both know it. But I am trying." By December, Hannah was feeling better, and her belly had started to round noticeably. They spent Christmas quietly, just the two of them, with a small pine tree that Kellen had cut and decorated with strings of popcorn. It was the happiest Christmas Hannah could remember, made sweeter by the life growing inside her and the man at her side. In early January, a year after Kellen had walked into that blizzard, another storm came through. It was not as severe as the one that had brought them together, but it was enough to bury Concord under fresh snow and keep everyone inside for a few days. Hannah and Kellen spent those days by the fire, Kellen reading aloud from one of the books Hannah had brought from Pennsylvania, Hannah knitting tiny clothes for the baby. At night, they would lie in bed and talk about the future, about what they would name the child, about how they would raise them. "If it is a boy, I want to name him after your father," Kellen said one night, his hands spread across Hannah's belly, feeling the baby kick. "And if it is a girl, whatever you want, as long as it is not something ridiculous like Mehitabel or Prudence." Hannah swatted his arm, laughing. "Those are perfectly good names." "They are terrible names, and you know it." They argued playfully about names for the next hour, neither of them willing to concede, until finally they fell asleep tangled together, the argument forgotten. The baby came in late May, during a warm spell that had wildflowers blooming across the valley. Hannah's labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Kellen stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement, even when she screamed at him that this was all his fault. And she was never letting him touch her again. When it was finally over, when Dr. Morrison placed a tiny, squalling bundle in Hannah's arms, Kellen looked down at his son, with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Kellen whispered, touching one finger to the baby's tiny fist. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Hannah's father, and he was indeed perfect. Dark-haired like his father, with his mother's brown eyes and a set of lungs that could wake the dead. Kellen was besotted from the first moment, constantly holding his son, talking to him in a low, gentle voice that Hannah had never heard him use before. "You are going to spoil him," Hannah said one afternoon, watching her husband walk Thomas around the cabin, pointing out different objects and explaining what they were. "That is my job as his father," Kellen replied, Well, that and teaching him how to survive in the wilderness. But we have time for that later. Right now, I am just going to love him. They settled into the chaos of new parenthood, sleepless nights and endless diaper changes, and the overwhelming love that came with this tiny person who depended on them for everything. Kellen proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle, unafraid to get his hands dirty. He built a cradle for Thomas out of pine, spending hours sanding it smooth so there would be no splinters to harm the baby's soft skin. In August, they finally bought land, a piece of property just outside Concord with enough space for a real house and a barn for Juniper and the other horses Kellen wanted to raise. They broke ground in September, and by the time winter came again, they had the frame up and the roof on. It was a cold day in December when they finally moved in, the second anniversary of the blizzard that had brought them together. Hannah stood in the doorway of their new home, Thomas in her arms, and looked around at the wide main room with its stone fireplace, at the kitchen with its new stove, at the bedrooms waiting to be filled. "What do you think?" Kellen asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around both her and Thomas. "I think it is perfect," Hannah said, leaning back against his chest. "I think we have built something wonderful here." "We have," Kellen agreed, "and we are just getting started." He was right. Over the next few years, they filled that house with life and love. A daughter came 2 years after Thomas, a little girl they named Sarah, who had her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn streak. Then another son, James, who was quiet and thoughtful and loved to follow his father around the property, learning everything Kellen could teach him. Kellen built up a business guiding and training horses, his damaged hands no impediment to his work. Hannah continued sewing, though now she also took in students, teaching other women the trade. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On winter nights, when the children were asleep and snow fell soft outside the windows, Hannah and Kellen would sit by the fire and remember that first blizzard, that first meeting. Kellen would hold up his hands, looking at the scars where his fingertips used to be, and Hannah would take those hands in hers and kiss them, thanking God and fate and whatever force had sent this man into her life. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him once. "Losing your fingers for a horse you did not even know?" Kellen pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her. "Not for a single second. Those fingers bought me you and our children and this life. I would make that walk again 1,000 times over." "You had better not," Hannah said fiercely. "I am not letting you risk yourself like that ever again." "Fair enough." Kellen kissed the top of her head. "I have everything I need right here anyway. No reason to go walking into any more blizzards." But they both knew that was not quite true, because Kellen would walk into a blizzard for any of them, for Hannah or the children, or even for Juniper again if it came to it. That was who he was. The man who had climbed a mountain in a storm because he could not stand the thought of a woman losing something she loved. And Hannah would do the same for him, would face any danger, weather any storm, because that was what love was. It was choosing someone over and over again, in big moments and small ones, in blizzards and sunshine and all the ordinary days in between. The years passed, measured in birthdays and harvests, in horses trained and clothes sewn, in children growing tall and strong. Thomas inherited his father's size and quiet strength, becoming a skilled horseman by the time he was 12. Sarah was fearless and adventurous, always climbing trees or exploring the hills behind their property. James was the scholar, constantly reading, dreaming of becoming a teacher someday. In 1889, when Thomas was 10 and Sarah 8 and James 6, another child came, a surprise that left both Hannah and Kellen shocked and delighted. Another daughter, born during a thunderstorm in early June, with a shock of black hair and her mother's fierce determination evident from the moment she drew her first breath. "Well, what should we name her?" Kellen asked, holding his newest daughter with the same awe he had shown with Thomas 11 years earlier. "Rose," Hannah said, "for my mother, and because she is our late bloomer, our unexpected gift." Rose she became, and she lived up to her name, growing into a beautiful, spirited child who had all of them wrapped around her little finger. Kellen, who had mellowed over the years, but was still fundamentally the same steady, protective man Hannah had married, was completely undone by his youngest daughter. He could refuse her nothing, much to Hannah's exasperation and the older children's amusement. Life was not always easy. There were hard years when the crops failed and money was tight. There was the summer when Thomas broke his arm falling from a horse, and the terrifying week when Sarah developed a fever that had them all fearing the worst. There were disagreements and arguments, moments when Hannah and Kellen did not see eye to eye, when they had to work to remember why they had chosen each other in the first place. But they always came back to it, back to the love that had been forged in a blizzard, tempered by pain and loss and the simple choice to keep showing up for each other. They were partners in the truest sense, building a life together one day at a time. In the spring of 1895, they celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. Thomas was 15 now, nearly a man, already as tall as his father and broader through the shoulders. Sarah was 13, growing into a beautiful young woman who reminded Hannah so much of herself at that age. James was 11, bookish and kind, with a gentle soul that seemed out of place in the rough and tumble world they lived in, but that made him all the more precious. And Rose was 5, a whirlwind of energy and mischief who kept them all on their toes. Kellen had gray threading through his dark hair now, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into mountain sun. His hands, scarred and missing their fingertips, were rough with calluses, the hands of a man who had worked hard his entire life. But when he looked at Hannah, his eyes still held that same intensity they had on the night they met, that same deep and abiding love. Hannah had her own gray hairs, her own lines earned from years of laughter and worry, and the sheer work of raising 4 children. But she was happy, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she had been 18 and alone. Newly arrived in a strange town, with nothing but a horse and a hope for something better. On their anniversary, Kellen surprised her by taking her back up to his mountain cabin. The children stayed with Mrs. Patterson, who was older now, but still sharp as a tack and more than capable of managing them for a few days. It was the first time Hannah and Kellen had been alone together in years, and the ride up into the high country felt like stepping back in time. The cabin was still there, weathered but standing strong. They spent 2 days there, just the two of them, and it was like being newlyweds again. They talked about their children, about their dreams for the future, about how lucky they were to have found each other. On the second night, they lay together under the stars. The valley spread out below them in silver moonlight. Kellen pulled Hannah close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you remember that night?" Kellen asked softly. "When I went after Juniper?" "Every detail," Hannah said. "I was so scared. I thought I had lost her. And then I thought I had lost you too, when you came back with your hands frozen. Best decision I ever made, walking into that storm. Worst decision you ever made, nearly killing yourself for a horse. Best decision," Kellen repeated firmly, "because it brought me you, and everything that came after." Hannah tilted her head up to look at him. In the moonlight, she could see the boy he must have been, underneath the man he had become. I love you, Kellen Erickson. I have loved you since the moment you came back through that blizzard, and I will love you until the day I die. And I love you, Hannah Erickson. My wife, my partner, the best thing that ever happened to me. He kissed her then, soft and sweet. And Hannah felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt the first time, all those years ago. They stayed one more day, and then headed back down the mountain, back to their children, their home, their life. But Hannah carried that time with her, held it close like a precious gift, because in the midst of all the chaos and work and endless demands of their daily life, it was important to remember. To remember who they were together and why they had chosen each other and how very lucky they were. The years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a fine young man, serious and responsible, who took over much of the horse training business from his father. At 18, he started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Elizabeth, who made him smile in a way Hannah recognized. She saw in them the same tentative hope she and Kellen had shared at the start, and her heart was glad. Sarah, at 16, was still wild and free, not ready to settle down, but already drawing the attention of half the young men in the county. She had her father's skill with horses and her mother's head for business, and Hannah suspected that someday she would do something remarkable, though what that might be, none of them could say. James, at 14, was exactly who he had always been, gentle and studious. He talked about going to college someday, becoming a teacher or maybe even a lawyer. Kellen worried that the world would be too harsh for his sensitive middle son. But Hannah knew better. James had a core of steel under that gentle exterior, and he would find his way. And Rose, at 8, was still the baby of the family, spoiled and loved and completely fearless. She followed her father everywhere, learning to track and hunt and survive in the wilderness. Skills that made Kellen proud and Hannah nervous. On a cold November day in 1897, Kellen came into the house looking thoughtful. Hannah was making bread, her hands covered in flour, and she looked up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What is it?" she asked. "I saw Juniper today," Kellen said. "Really saw her. She's getting old, Hannah. Gray around her muzzle, moving a little slower." Hannah's hands stilled in the dough. Juniper, the horse that had started everything. She was 22 now, ancient for a horse, but still alive, still part of their lives. Hannah had known this day would come eventually, but she had not let herself think about it. "She has had a good life," Hannah said softly. "Thanks to you. Thanks to both of us." Kellen crossed to her, taking her flour-covered hands in his scarred ones. "I was just thinking about that night, about how everything could have been different. If I had not been in town that day, if I had minded my own business, if the storm had been worse, if I had not been able to find her. But you did find her, and you brought her back. And here we are, 19 years later, with 4 children and a life neither of us could have imagined." Hannah squeezed his hands. Everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. "I believe that," Kellen said. "I believe we were meant to find each other, even if it took a blizzard to make it happen." Juniper lived another year, passing peacefully in her sleep one night in the spring of 1898. They buried her on their property, under a tree where she used to like to stand in the shade. Kellen carved a marker for her grave, and all 6 of them stood around it, paying tribute to the horse that had changed their lives. "She was a good horse," Thomas said. his voice thick with emotion. "The best." "She was," Hannah agreed, tears streaming down her face. "And she gave us everything." Kellen put his arm around Hannah, and their children gathered close, a family united in grief and love and memory. And as they stood there in the spring sunshine, Hannah thought about how strange and beautiful life was, how one moment could change everything, how love could grow from the unlikeliest of circumstances. The 20th century arrived, bringing with it changes and challenges they could never have anticipated. Thomas married Elizabeth in the summer of 1900, and by the following spring, they had made Hannah and Kellen grandparents. A boy, healthy and strong, with Thomas's dark hair and Elizabeth's green eyes. Holding her grandson for the first time, Hannah felt the circle complete. She was 40 years old now, no longer the young woman who had come west alone, terrified and grieving. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother. She had built a life, created a legacy. And it all started with a horse and a blizzard and a man brave enough to walk into the storm. Sarah left home at 19, much to everyone's surprise, heading to San Francisco to work as a photographer's apprentice. It was an unconventional choice, one that scandalized some of their neighbors. But Hannah and Kellen supported her. They had not raised their children to be conventional, after all. James did go to college, studying law at the University of California, making them all proud. And Rose, as she grew, showed every sign of being as fierce and independent as her sister, as steady and strong as her brothers. In the fall of 1905, on a crisp October day that reminded Hannah of that first winter, she and Kellen took a ride up into the foothills. Just the two of them, the way they used to before life got so busy, before responsibilities and grandchildren and all the complications of family. They stopped at a place that overlooked the valley, where you could see for miles in every direction. The leaves were turning gold and red, and the air smelled of pine and approaching winter. 27 years, Hannah said, looking out at the view. "Can you believe it has been 27 years since you walked into that blizzard?" "Best walk I ever took," Kellen said. And Hannah laughed because he always said that, would probably always say that until the day he died. "We have had a good life, Haven, not we?" Hannah leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "The best," Kellen agreed. 4 children, 2 grandchildren with more on the way, if I am reading the signs right. A home we built with our own hands, work that matters, and each other. Always each other. "Always," Hannah echoed. They sat there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. And as they rode back down the mountain toward home, toward their family and their life, Hannah felt a contentment so deep it was almost like peace. There would be more challenges ahead, she knew. Life was never easy, never simple. But they would face those challenges together, the way they had faced everything else. With love, with stubbornness, with the same determination that had carried Kellen through a blizzard and Hannah through the grief of losing everything she knew. They had built something worth having, something worth fighting for. A love story that started with a mountain man and a woman and a horse, and grew into a family, a legacy, a life. And on winter nights, when the snow fell soft and cold outside their windows, Hannah would sometimes look at her husband, at his scarred hands and gray hair, and the face she loved more than anything in the world, and remember. Remember the fear and the cold and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he would come back. Remember the way he had looked when he stumbled through the door, more dead than alive, a frozen horse in tow. Remember the moment she realized she was falling in love with this stranger who had risked everything for her. It was a good memory, a perfect memory, the beginning of everything that mattered. The years continued to roll forward, as they always do, indifferent to human joy or sorrow. Sarah came home from San Francisco in 1907, no longer the wild girl who had left, but a confident woman with her own photography studio and a reputation that was spreading across California. She brought with her a young man named Daniel, a writer for one of the San Francisco newspapers, and announced they were engaged. The wedding was held at the family property in the summer, with all the children home, grandchildren running wild, and friends and neighbors from across the county in attendance. Kellen gave Sarah away with tears in his eyes, and Hannah watched from the front row, her heart full to bursting. This was what they had built. Not just a family, but a foundation. A place where their children could grow and dream and become whoever they were meant to be, knowing they were loved, knowing they could always come home. James graduated from law school in 1908 and opened a practice in Sacramento, dedicating himself to defending the rights of workers and immigrants. He was exactly the kind of lawyer the world needed more of, and Hannah and Kellen were proud beyond words. He married a year later, a woman named Catherine who was a teacher, and they seemed perfectly matched in temperament and ideals. Rose, at 17, was the only one still at home, and she showed no signs of leaving anytime soon. She had become an accomplished rider and tracker, often accompanying her father on his guiding trips into the mountains. The two of them had a bond that was special, the youngest child and her father, and Hannah loved watching them together. On a warm evening in May of 1910, Hannah and Kellen sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the valley. They were in their 50s now, both of them feeling the weight of their years, but still strong, still healthy, still together. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" Hannah asked suddenly. "If we had never met? If you had not gone after Juniper that night?" Kellen was quiet for a moment, considering. "I try not to," he said finally, "because thinking about a life without you is like trying to imagine a world without air. It does not make sense. You are so much a part of me now that I cannot remember who I was before you. You were a mountain man, living alone in a cabin," Hannah said with a smile. "Stubborn and solitary and probably headed for a lonely old age." "Exactly. You saved me, Hannah, just as much as I saved Juniper that night." "We saved each other," Hannah corrected gently. "That is what love does. It rescues us from the loneliness we did not even know we were living in." Kellen reached over and took her hand, his scarred fingers intertwining with hers. "I would walk into 1,000 blizzards for you. I want you to know that. Even now, even with my old bones and my missing fingertips, I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "I know," Hannah said softly, "and I would nurse you through 1,000 recoveries, because that is what we do. We show up for each other, no matter what." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the stars beginning to appear overhead. And Hannah thought about all the moments that had led them here, all the choices and chances and small miracles that had woven their lives together. A blizzard, a horse, a stranger willing to risk everything. And from that, an entire world had grown. Rose married in 1913, choosing a young rancher from up north who could match her wildness and love of the land. The wedding was smaller than Sarah's had been, more intimate, but no less joyful. And when Rose rode away with her new husband, heading toward their own life, their own adventure, Hannah cried even though she was happy. It was the natural way of things, children growing up and leaving. But that did not make it any easier. Just us again, Kellen said that night, as they prepared for bed in a house that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. Just us, Hannah agreed, like it was in the beginning. I liked it then, and I like it now, Kellen said, pulling her into his arms. You are all I have ever really needed. They settled into this new phase of life, the empty nest years, and found it was not as lonely as they had feared. Their children visited often, bringing grandchildren who filled the house with noise and laughter. Hannah continued her sewing, though her eyes were not as sharp as they once were, and Kellen still worked with horses, though he left the harder training to younger men. They had earned their rest, people told them. They had worked hard, raised good children, built a successful life. It was time to slow down, to enjoy the fruits of their labor. But Hannah and Kellen were not people who knew how to slow down. They kept working, kept living, kept showing up for each other and for their family with the same dedication they always had. In 1918, the influenza pandemic swept through California, claiming thousands of lives. It was a terrifying time. With people dying faster than they could be buried, whole families wiped out in a matter of days. Hannah and Kellen isolated themselves on their property, seeing no one, taking no chances. They were in their 60s now, vulnerable, and they knew it. They lost neighbors, lost friends, lost people they had known for decades. But somehow, miraculously, their family was spared. All 4 children survived, all the grandchildren, all the spouses. It felt like a gift, like Providence had smiled on them one more time. When the pandemic finally passed, leaving the world changed and grieving, Hannah and Kellen emerged from their isolation with a renewed appreciation for the fragility of life. They had been given another chance, more time together, and they were not going to waste it. They traveled, something they had rarely done before. They went to San Francisco to visit Sarah and her family, marveling at the bustling city and the photographs in her successful studio. They went to Sacramento to see James, attending a court case where he defended a group of farm workers with such passion and skill that Hannah could barely recognize her quiet, bookish son in the fierce advocate before them. They visited Thomas and Elizabeth on their ranch, spent weeks at a time with Rose and her growing family up north. They reconnected with their children as adults, as equals, and found new joy in those relationships. And through it all, through every trip and visit and new experience, Kellen and Hannah remained partners, still finishing each other's sentences after 40 years of marriage, still reaching for each other's hands, still choosing each other day after day after day. In the spring of 1925, on their 43rd wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration. All 4 came home, bringing spouses and children, and even a few great-grandchildren. The house and property overflowed with family. 3 generations of Ericksons gathered to honor the 2 people who had started it all. There were speeches and toasts, stories told and retold about Hannah and Kellen's early years, about the blizzard and the frostbitten hands and the stubborn, unlikely love that had grown between a city girl and a mountain man. The grandchildren listened wide-eyed. The great-grandchildren were too young to understand. But everyone felt the weight of it, the importance of this legacy. When it was Kellen's turn to speak, he stood slowly, his joints protesting but his back still straight, his shoulders still broad. He was 65 years old, his hair completely gray now, his face lined with decades of living. But when he looked at Hannah, his eyes held the same intensity they always had. "I am not good with words," he said, his voice still strong despite his years. "Never have been. But I want to say something about love, about marriage, about building a life with someone. It is not easy. Anyone who tells you it is lying. There are hard days and harder nights. There are times when you will want to give up, when you will wonder if you made the right choice. But here is what I have learned in 43 years with this woman. Love is not a feeling. Feelings come and go. Love is a choice. It is choosing to show up base, to keep trying, to forgive and be forgiven, to build something together even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. Hannah and I, we have had a good life. But it is good because we chose to make it good. Every single day, for 43 years, we chose each other. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. There was not a dry eye in the house when he finished. Hannah stood and went to him, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while their family applauded and cheered around them. "I love you," Hannah whispered into his chest. "My brave, wonderful, infuriating man. I love you more than words can say." "I love you too," Kellen murmured back. "My stubborn, beautiful, perfect wife. You are my everything." The celebration went late into the night, with music and dancing and laughter that echoed across the valley. And as Hannah danced with her husband, his scarred hands gentle in hers, she thought about how far they had come. From that terrifying night in the blizzard to this moment, surrounded by the family they had created, the legacy they had built. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. The years grew shorter, the way they do as you get older, each one seeming to pass more quickly than the last. Hannah and Kellen's health began to decline, as was inevitable. Kellen developed arthritis in his joints, the old frostbite damage making it worse. Hannah's eyesight continued to fade until she could no longer do the fine sewing work she had once excelled at. But they adapted, the way they always had. They helped each other, supported each other, compensated for each other's weaknesses. When Kellen's hands ached too badly to button his shirt, Hannah did it for him. When Hannah's eyes were too tired to read, Kellen read aloud to her, his rough voice stumbling over the words, but persistent nonetheless. In 1930, on a cold December night that reminded them both of that first blizzard so long ago, they lay in bed together, listening to the wind howl around the house. They were both 70 now, ancient by the standards of their time, but still together, still present for each other. "Do you have any regrets?" Hannah asked, her head resting on Kellen's shoulder. "Only that we do not have more time," Kellen said. "I would like another lifetime with you. Maybe 2 or 3. "That would be nice," Hannah agreed. "But I am grateful for the time we have had. Every moment of it, even the hard parts." "Especially the hard parts," Kellen said. "Because those are the moments that proved what we had was real. Anyone can love someone when things are easy. We loved each other through the storms." Hannah tilted her head up to kiss him, a gesture as familiar as breathing after 52 years of marriage. "You are my storm," she said. "The best thing that ever happened to me, even though you scared me half to death that first night." Kellen laughed, the sound rumbling in his chest. "You scared me too. I was not supposed to fall in love. I had my mountain, my solitude. And then you came along with your stubborn determination and your brown eyes. And suddenly nothing else mattered." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. And when morning came, they woke up together, the way they had for 52 years, the way they would continue to do for as long as they had left. Kellen died first in the spring of 1933, at the age of 73. It was peaceful, as these things go. He simply went to sleep one night and did not wake up, his heart finally giving out after 7 decades of beating strong and steady. Hannah was beside him, holding his hand, and she knew the moment he left because something fundamental in the universe shifted. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over the state to pay their respects. Kellen had been a fixture in the community for over 50 years, respected and admired by everyone who knew him. But as they lowered his casket into the ground, all Hannah could think about was the young man who had walked into a blizzard for a horse, who had come back frostbitten and half dead, but triumphant. That man, her man, was gone now, and Hannah felt like part of herself had been buried with him. She lived for 2 more years after Kellen died, years that felt hollow and strange without him. Her children took care of her, making sure she was never alone. But it was not the same. Nothing was the same without Kellen. She had spent 52 years with him at her side, had built her entire adult life around their partnership. And now she was adrift without him, a boat cut loose from its anchor. Hannah Calloway Erickson died on a warm evening in May of 1935, at the age of 75. Her children found her in the rocking chair on the porch, looking out at the valley she had loved, a peaceful expression on her face. In her lap was a photograph of Kellen, taken when he was young, his dark hair long and wild, his eyes intense, his scarred hands resting on his knees. They buried her next to him, under the trees where they had buried Juniper all those years ago. The headstone was simple, just their names and dates, and a single line that Thomas had insisted on. They walked through the storm together, and found love on the other side. At the funeral, with 3 generations of Ericksons gathered to say goodbye, Thomas stood to speak about his parents. He was 65 years old himself now, a grandfather many times over. But when he talked about Hannah and Kellen, his voice broke. "My father once told me that love is a choice," Thomas said, "that feelings come and go. But love is choosing someone every day, no matter what. My parents lived that truth. They chose each other through illness and health, through poverty and prosperity, through loss and joy. They built a life together, and in doing so, they gave all of us the foundation to build our own lives. We are all here because of a horse named Juniper, and a blizzard, and a man brave enough to walk into it. That is our origin story. That is where we come from, and it is a legacy worth honoring." The family gathered at the house afterward, the same house Hannah and Kellen had built all those years ago. It was full of people, full of noise and laughter and tears, full of the life that Hannah and Kellen had created. And if you listened closely, if you paid attention, you could still feel them there. In the walls they had built with their own hands, in the land they had worked and loved, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their names. Hannah and Kellen were gone, but they had never really left. They were woven into the fabric of this place, this family, this legacy. Their love story had started with a blizzard and a horse and a desperate act of bravery. It had been tested by frostbite and hardship and the endless challenges of building a life from nothing. But it had endured. It had grown into something bigger than either of them could have imagined, something that would outlive them both. Because that is what true love does. It grows, it spreads, it creates ripples that extend far beyond the 2 people at its center. Hannah and Kellen had loved each other fiercely and well, and in doing so, they had given their descendants a blueprint for how to live, how to love, how to weather any storm. Years later, decades later, their great-great-grandchildren would still tell the story about the mountain man who walked into a blizzard for a woman he did not know, who came back with the horse, but frostbitten bad, about the woman who nursed him back to health and fell in love with him along the way, about how they built a life together, a family, a legacy. It was a good story, a true story, a love story in the truest sense of the word. And it all started on a cold winter night in 1877, when a stubborn woman went out into a storm and a brave man followed her. Neither of them knew it then, but that moment, that choice, would echo through generations, would create a family, a home, a love that would outlast them both. And somewhere, maybe in the wind that blows through the valley, maybe in the way the light falls on the mountains at sunset, you can still feel them. Hannah and Kellen, together at last, the way they always were, the way they always will be. Two souls who found each other against impossible odds, who chose each other through every storm, who proved that love, real love, is strong enough to weather anything, even a blizzard.